Namaste, friends, and welcome to this edition of Book Talk with Dr. Sanjeev Chopra. Thank you, Dr. Chopra, for joining us. Today, viewers, we are going to talk about his earlier book, We the People. Can you please hold
Oh,
up?
yes, of course.
Yeah.
Looking forward to this. I'll hold up both the paperback and the hardback.
Yes. So, We the People of the States of Bharat. So, the hardcover was released, if I'm not mistaken, in 2022.
Yes.
And then we have the paperback edition. And finally, last year, quite recently, the Hindi translation has been published by Raj Kamal. So later on, we will talk a little bit about the Hindi translation as well. But first of all, I'm so honored and delighted to have you on our podcast one more time. I consider you one of the most distinguished scholar as well as civil servants of India. You are currently a senior fellow at the Prime
Much
Minister's.
don't embarrass me. I can see myself blushing.
No, at the Prime Minister's Museum and Library. And I want to tell you, viewers, I had the privilege of reading this book when it was in manuscript before it was published. And I've even written a little blurb
You endorse the
for
book.
this book.
You endorse the book.
I endorsed the book. So let me read out what I wrote just to give you a sense of how much I admire this book and its author. So this is what I wrote, and it's published in the book. Maps both reflect and influence how a nation regards itself. Original, unique, even unprecedented in its method of understanding the evolution of the Republic, Sanjeev Chopra recounts the political reimagining of post independence India through its changing maps, looking especially at the progress of state formation and the changing contours of Indian federalism. This remarkable book gives voice to India's cartographic reimagination. So, viewers, this sort of sums up, but very briefly. In fact, I admire the book much more than I could mention in the little blurb. And I'll tell you why, if Dr. Chopra allows me for a moment. We are all so fascinated by maps. In fact, cartography and its progress is linked to the rise of modernity and of colonialism itself. So, if you look at pre modern maps of the world, they resemble perceptions more than realities. There's no correlation between actual size, direction, shape, and what we today regard as a stable landmass. But if you look at the maps of any country, you'll see how much they change. Today India has 28 states and 8 union territories, but don't forget that as recently as 2022, with the abrogation of Article 370, the map of India was changed, and the state of Jammu and Kashmir became 2 union territories, as we know. But if you look at the map of India, on the eve of independence, I don't know if you can show it on the screen.
Won't be
Uh,
so clear. I mean, I can show it. That was the map that we inherited.
and
And
it's
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 still
amazing. It
it
looks
is
nothing like what India looks like today. And then in 1950 and so forth, with the reorganization of states and then the division of the states, just see, you can find it online, of course. All these maps are now widely available online. But there you go. And if you look at the map of British India, it started with 3 presidencies: Calcutta, Bombay, and
in fact.
Madras.
Let me tell you. You see the whole concept. How did the mapping start? It started because when Warren Hastings was the governor, still the governor of Bengal. He was sitting. I mean, they needed to put a map of his Hindustani stroke Indian possessions, and that time it was only Plassey. It was only the Bihar Bengal area that was there. That was 1796, and then soon thereafter Sikandrabad was added. Then soon thereafter Allahabad was added. So what was happening was that every 6 years, every 5 years, the boundary or the map behind the Governor General was changed. So that's how the Survey of India, which was then called the Survey of Bengal, that
Yes.
tradition started that there will be a map behind the desk of the sovereign, right? And the Rashtrapati ji also has as a map behind the desk. And therefore, every state governor, every district magistrate, everybody has a map. So this is how the tradition of making maps started, 1796. And Makrand, you said very rightly. You see, if you see the earlier maps, say of 1600, 1700, 1800, you put strange, you put lions and pythons and tigers and whatever people thought would be the would be the would be there in the flora and fauna. So a lot of imaginary stuff was there in the maps, and it's only after the advent of science, the advent of technology, the advent of maritime, the advent of movement, and the trigonometry. That is how this whole thing started. And
Exactly, exactly.
frankly,
And I also
Mughals did
wanted to
not give us
mention
the Mughals did not give us any great maps. I mean,
precisely,
they're
precisely, and
dead
that
in.
was, see, that was one reason why the British also conquered us. In fact, in my book, I've tried to establish that the conquest of India was also conquest by knowledge. But we'll come back to that point later. Even in James Mill, they knew so much more about us than we knew about them. But viewers, if you looked at the map of India on the eve of independence, or even just after independence, there were 500 princely states. There were British Indian territories. It was such a hodgepodge. And that's one reason why I think it was such a great achievement of Sardar Patel, also Nehru, of course, to integrate all of these into our republic. And I suppose the process of integration is still ongoing. We have different arrangements with the Northeast. Dr. Chopra is going off to the Northeast, I know, tomorrow. And some people there don't even pay taxes. So, anyhow, to return to this book, let me tell you, as a lifelong academic, I was so impressed by the range of references. When I wrote the blurb, I actually counted more than 100 books and 200 articles have been referred to in this book. Can you imagine how much time it would have taken? You know, my estimate is, thousands of hours of research have gone into this book. It is more impressive than, so many PhD dissertations that I've myself guided or encountered. So kudos
No,
to you.
thank COVID for that. We have to thank COVID for that. I mean, the enforced solitude of COVID. Actually, come to think of it, for those who had a house and a library, I mean, those of us who were fortunate and privileged, I would say, we really got such a lot of time during COVID to read and write. Which this book, which took me 2.5 years, without COVID, it would have taken me 7 years, because in COVID, this is
Absolutely.
all that you could do. This is all that one could do. I mean, get up in the morning and read your books, collect more books from the library, and read more books. So COVID in some ways has been. I mean, for those of us who were planned out,
The collateral benefits of
yes,
COVID, like last time we talked about the collateral benefits of jail terms. I mean, Nehru
yes,
wrote
yeah,
most of his books in
yes,
his
most of
jail terms, whether in any jail where where he was incarcerated for such a long time, or even, the great Alipur jail. If you go and visit his cell, but to come back to this book, another thing actually that struck me about this book, apart from the range of references, is its unique methodology, to understand the growth of federalism or even the changes in the republic, the so called body politic of India, just by looking at its maps. I think as a methodology, I found it fascinating. And as a lover of books, I might add another thing. How do you read a book? You can read a book from start to finish, but sometimes I read a book by looking at the acknowledgments. And the different people that Dr. Chopra has thanked in this book, in my opinion, serve two purposes. Not only all those who contributed to this book, the different librarians, the fellowships he had at Cornell in Washington and elsewhere, the fantastic library of Labasna itself, all of that enters this book, but also all his friends, across the country, abroad, in the services, outside the services, at Harvard. So it also tells you the wide network of what actually fertilizes and goes into the making of a great book. That culture of reading, writing, discussion, which we really need, we sorely lack in India. In fact, the culture of reviewing, I must tell you, viewers, that Dr. Chopra is a great reviewer of books. You know, you look at his Millennium Post columns, any new book that meets his eye, he writes about it. This is a great service. And finally, by way of concluding this introductory portion, I also want to tell our viewers that he runs a very interesting, I say, because there's so many literary festivals today. But his is very interesting, and I'll tell you why. Because it's based on very high quality, very high benchmarks. It's called The Valley of Words. And I think it's a very appropriate name because he lives in Dehradun. So
Thank you.
Dune means valley, among other things. So he's a man of great accomplishments, a polymath, a great expert in agriculture. He has wonderful hobbies such as riding. He comes from a former princely state of Kapurthala and from a very distinguished family, a service family, if I might say so. In fact, his wife is also from a service family. And so we're very proud to have you on our podcast. And
You,
eventually,
yeah.
I want to tell you another thing, both you and the viewers, that I want to facilitate through the Shorabando chair what I'd like to call, a think tank with a difference. It's called the Wisdom Lab. To look at things in a integral perspective, to bring in multidisciplinary ideas, and to produce knowledge which is meaningful and not just sensational. And I hope that Dr. Chopra can become a member of our Council of Mentors because
Certainly, certainly, and
we,
with the with absolute
thank you so much. We really need mentors such as you with your wide range of expertise, your love of India, and also a love of books, of liberalism, of ideas. So, with all of these comments, let me just plunge straight into the book. So, if you look at the table of contents, I have an e-copy of the book on Kindle. So, let's look at this book a little bit. How does it proceed? It goes through maps and milestones, the marking of the internal boundaries of India. Then it goes to the first map of independent India, 1947. And, for me, I learned so much reading this book. How many of you, for instance, know that the princely state of Jammu and Kashmir was called Riyasat-e-Jammu wa Kashmir wa Ladakh wa Tibet ha? So maybe we can start with that Jammu and Kashmir chapter because it's still an ongoing story.
It's an ongoing story, and it's a story that will continue. In fact, there are many interesting aspects to this story. In fact, one of the things which I mentioned is, that Jinnah was not very keen on having Jammu Kashmir. He was not very keen. Other people in the ML may have been keen because he hated Sheikh Abdullah. There were two people whom Jinnah hated. One was the Nizam of Hyderabad, and the second was uh, was Sheikh Abdullah, because Jinnah, remember, wanted to be the sole spokesman of the Muslims, and there were two people who challenged his authority. One was in the south, that is the head, and Nizam of Hyderabad was also a very remarkable person. He was the person who was during the First World War. I'm sorry, I'm diverting from this place. In the First World War, when the Britishers wanted a firman so that the troops could still continue fighting against the Ottoman Empire, so he issued a firman that it is legit to fight for your king and for your country, and he also contributed money to the to the
War effort.
for the war effort, and he also supported the caliph, the Khalifa, because his son and his nephew married the two sisters there. But in lieu of that, he wanted something from the British. Now the British told him that, look, you already got a 21 gun salute. You already something. So like the story of Raja Man Singh, which I told you. So what more can be done for you? So then the British, typically as they do, they said, okay, the rest will be called His Highnesses, but you will be called His Exalted Highness. So he was the only His Exalted Highness in the country, ranking number one amongst all the princely states. So he was only
Yes.
21 gun salute. Now the
Yes.
other 21 gun salute state was Jammu Kashmir.
Yes. Yes.
Jammu Kashmir is also 21 gun state. And the fact is, you see that the Maharaja was vacillating, and there was a point of time when he was considering. He actually thought that independence is the best option. But the fact is that they were also thinking that his relationships with Nehru were not very good. Let us understand that situation also. That Hari Singh was hated Abdullah. Nehru and Abdullah were great friends. And therefore, while Nehru was not willing to accept, in fact, that is why Nehru was very keen that unless Sheikh Abdullah accepts this accession, although technically and from a very legal or from a very juridical point of view, the opinion of the Prime Minister or the opinion of the mass was not required because it was a covenant between the crown and the king. So all these things happened. But to cut a long story short, I mean there are many things about which I mentioned here in this book about how it evolved, how the tensions took place, how Gilgit and Baltistan. I mean, and I think the British played a very they played what should I say? I think you know we have not
Clever,
revised our
clever and dirty, clever and dirty.
very clever and very dirty and not very fair because you see, look at the counterfactual. The counterfactual is that if the subcontinent had remained the subcontinent, I mean, the subcontinent remained the subcontinent, the geopolitical economic potential of this region would have been unparalleled.
Immense,
Unparalleled.
immense.
Unparalleled, because imagine not having to spend all your resources on something like this because this Gilgit, Baltistan, the Saskatchewan issue would not have come up at all because, I mean, the Saskatchewan issue has come up because Pakistan decided to hand them over, so, on a platter. So if the Indian subcontinent had remained the Indian subcontinent, then the entire geopolitics of the world would have been very, very different. And in fact, the growth of the areas which are now constituting Pakistan and Bangladesh, their growth would even have been on an even better economic keel. But you know, it has happened. It has happened. Therefore, it has happened. So now we can only look back at things. But the fact is that we were so taken in by the British arguments at that time, by the British interpretation of things, by the British narrative, that it's taking us a long time to get out of it. It's still taking
Correct,
us
correct.
to get
Yeah,
out of it.
but as I was saying, the
Having
Jammu and
said
Kashmir.
that, having said that,
Yeah,
there is a we also have to understand that there were many things which the Britishers were able to formalize and were able to give. For example, and that's a point which I have always stated especially when I was addressing the IIAS gathering, that what Sardar Patel recognized about the ICS was their ability to do what they were asked to do. They were asked to ensure that the territory does not that the territory is preserved. They were asked to ensure that the state will always be revenue surplus and that the mother country will get a preferential treatment. So the ICS did what it was expected to do. So it's a
exactly,
good
exactly.
instrument. It's a good
Yeah,
instrument.
I was just saying that the Jammu and Kashmir story is not yet finished by far. The cartographic instability as well as the geopolitical tensions continue to this day. I mean, the POK, Pakistan occupied Kashmir, and what Pakistan's own cartographic instability, how they merged the states, demerged them. And on our
Yes, that
side
is
of the
true.
border,
And
and
one more thing.
abrogation has produced a completely new
Yes.
whatever challenge to us because Ladakh there was unrest with Wanchuk and all these people protesting. So go ahead. So I was just
No,
saying your book. Yeah,
the point which I wanted to make was, you see, that unlike China, unlike Pakistan, unlike Russia, unlike any other, and that is why India is India, because there was no attempt to make any demographic change in Kashmir. Kashmir continues to be Muslim majority. No attempts were ever made to change that demography. You know, whereas if you notice in the case of Tibet, the
Tibet.
Chinese have deliberately tried to change the demography. The Russians tried to change the demography in various places, including Ukraine and Crimea. So where this has happened in Pakistan, but India that way has always been far more democratic in its approach. Has always been has always respected the human rights, respected the cultural rights, respected the political rights, and respected the linguistic rights.
In fact,
Sometimes what happens is because
the
it is because
the allegation is that our side has been too soft because the allegation is that the Rohingyas were settled in the Jammu area precisely to destabilize its very slender Hindu majority, if not slender, at least precarious, given the tensions. But you already so we'll move on from Kashmir to you already mentioned Hyderabad, how after the state was absorbed, it was again redivided because there were the Hyderabad Karnataka areas
always
which
reorganized. In fact, I always use the word reorganized rather than divide. So,
yes,
when
yes.
people say that UP was divided, I said, no, UP was reorganized because the choice of the word is very important. So, India has had a reorganization. We have reorganized the boundaries and for the right reasons, for the right reasons. The most important aspect of the book, which I bring out, is from the story of Sikkim. The story of Sikkim, where I've mentioned that, because in the case of Sikkim, there are four narratives that you get. I mean, the facts are not changed. The fact is that Sikkim was a Nepali majority state in 1947 itself, and they wanted to merge with India. Now, that is something, a lot of people say that India took over Sikkim, this happened. Now, I was SDO of Kalimpong, which is right next to Sikkim, and therefore I have been interested in the issue of Sikkim's merger with India. But the point is because the people wanted. Nobody, India has never gone and taken over a territory where the people did not want to be a part of it. You know,
Goa,
the,
Goa,
the Goa,
Goa,
Goa, Goa and Puducherry and
Pondicherry.
Chandrapur and all these places, these are all places where people wanted to be part of it. So we've never gone and occupied territory in the way others have occupied territory. So the point that my book makes is that can I read out something from my prologue if you
Please,
don't mind?
please, please,
Yeah,
please
so
do.
that's the most important part of my book. In fact, I think because the fact is that even when people will see the book or buy it, the possibility of reading it is not very high. You and I know it. You and I know it that we feel very happy thinking कि किताब library में चलेगी तो पढ़ा nobody very few people will read it. Probably these days Gemini will make a little summary and they'll ask give a 350 word summary, then
Word
someone
summary of a 350-page book.
get book. And then they'll say, no, it's interesting. So that you give us 1,000 words, so maybe something of that sort. But I wanted to read to you from the prologue because, and it's called Perspective. Now, here I've written that Sikkim. Yeah, I've written here that are there any lessons from this study? Are there any lessons from this study? First and foremost is the fact that while the notion of identity is certainly fluid, there are certain binding elements which prevent it from meandering too far away. So, Punjabis, Dogaris, Punjabis in Delhi, Punjabis in Punjab, Punjabis in Haryana, Punjabis in Jammu Kashmir, there is an identity. But certainly you are not a Malayali, right? You cannot stretch it. So what I'm saying is that the notion of identity is fluid, but there are certain binding elements that prevent it from meandering too far. Language is usually a force which brings people together, but script can divide, as has happened in the case of Punjabi,
Yeah,
Gurmukhi script,
Punjabi.
Devanagari script, and in Pakistan, the Shahmukhi script. There is a considerable difference in the way pan India parties and regional, that is state based parties, look at issues. So, now it will be possible to resolve the Tista crisis or the Tista issue. Because whether it is Ms. Mamta Banerjee, she was not looking at resolution from the point of view of India. She was looking at everything from the point of view of
West
Bengal,
Bengal. Yeah,
Bengal
West.
specific. So the perceptions which whether it is the DMK government or the AIDMK government, I mean the perceptions about Sri Lanka will be based there. So the way the CM of Punjab looks at Pakistan Punjab is very different from the way the rest of India will be looking at Punjab. Third, political parties change their perspectives with time, and those political parties which do not change their perspective with time are doomed. In fact, the classic example is the Bharatiya Janata Party, the Janasangh, and the RSS. they've changed their perspective on regional states. They've changed their perspective on linguistic states from a position of rank opposition to now saying that not only is it fine, but wanting to take credit for Uttarakhand, Jharkhand, and Telangana. Telangana example is an example where both parties are trying to take credit for it. Okay. Fourth, migration affects demography. Migration affects demography, and demography has a direct bearing on electoral politics. Fifth, there's a gap between what the national political leadership of a party may want and what the ground level workers actually need or what they want. Take the case of the national pension reforms. I mean, the political parties, both the UPA and the NDA, have been saying that we should move away from the pension regime. We should go in for a more modern, savings based pension regime. But ground level, I mean, whenever there's an election, I mean, people, I mean, whether it's the Congress government, they all say, okay, let's go back, because the ground reality is sometimes different from what the larger reality, and that was very clear during the Maharashtra movement, the Maharashtra movement.
Samyukta Maharashtra.
So everybody is saying, no, we want to, but ground level workers wanted something different. The opposition to an idea can come from the most unexpected quarters. Opposition to an idea can come from the most unexpected quarters, because when Roy and Sinha, Sri Krishna Sinha and PC Roy, they wanted to merge their two states. Now imagine the counterfactual. Both the assemblies have passed a resolution saying that we'll merge these parties, and this is before the linguistic reorganization states has taken deep root. That is before Andhra state is being made, because 53, 54 is the time when BC Roy goes to Amritsar and sees the Congress session there. I don't remember, 52 or 53. And he sees the phenomenal work which the rehabilitation for Punjab displaced persons that happened. And that happened because there was Sonipat, there was Panipat, there was Kurukshetra, there was Gurgaon, there was Faridabad. This land was practically empty. I mean, this land, there was space to rehabilitate the land, the farmers, the professionals from there, and there had been a lot of migration. There had been a lot of out migration from Punjab as well. Now, in the case of East Bengal, when they came to West Bengal, there was just no space. Actually, no space. So, what happened to these people who came? Some of them were sent to Andaman, some were sent to Dandakaran, some were sent
Madhya
to
Pradesh.
I'm saying
Madhya Pradesh.
Madhya Pradesh. And because they went in smaller groups, because they went in groups of 5,000, 10,000, they did not carry a political voice. Whereas today you have the last chief minister of Haryana was a Punjabi, because they moved in such large numbers, and because the language was different, but it was not so different. It was not so different. So he felt that, if the rehabilitation of the refugees in Punjab, Sindh and Punjab refugees could take place because of that expanded area, we should try the same thing in Bengal. And the opposition came from the UP Congress. The opposition came from the CPM, CPI at that time, because the UP Congress felt that here will be a state larger than them.
Oh my. Oh, it would be a behemoth. It would have been a behemoth.
Yeah, so they felt that this will be a state which will be the largest in the country. So anyway, this was
and yet you see, it's so ironic that later on Punjab itself gets divided into Himachal, Punjab, and Haryana.
That happened. Seventh, the English language press, the Hindi newspapers and the regional newspapers have different views on most issues. So what issue, like whether it is GST, for example, all the economic press would be going gaga, but the regional press would have a different view. Or for that matter, most issues. Every story has multiple perspectives, which is highlighted from the Sikkim story. Because in Sikkim, the first book that came out was by Sunanda Kedattare, in which he says smash and grab. I mean, the title says it, smash and grab. Now, the next book immediately thereafter it was called Sikkim Saga, the story of Saga, by B.S. Das. He was the administrator there at that point. Now, nobody is disputing the facts, but it is the interpretation of the facts which changes. And the third book is written by Andrew Duff, Requiem for a Himalayan Kingdom. He bases it on the story of he bases it on the text of the Scottish teachers there. They are his relation. And then you have
The
another book
teachers
written
of the
by
Chogyars, of the
Chogyar.
Chogyars. Yeah.
Chogyar. And then you have Sidhu's book, KBS Sidhu. He was the son-in-law of Swaran Singh. That's incidental, but he was the RAW officer there. He was the chief of RAW in Sikkim. And he wrote it from the point of view of Qazi Lendub Dorji, because he felt that Qazi Lendub Dorji has been given short shrift by the country. And Qazi Lendub Dorji was actually the person who brought about the integration of Sikkim into the country. But during the emergency, things happened, and therefore he didn't get that sort of thing. And then there's another book which is written, which says that actually this is the result of a contest between India and China. So it was so the same story, the same, and then that's true because I mentioned Sikkim because Sikkim is a small state, and very few books have been written on Sikkim. But if you talk about the reorganization of Punjab, you'll have 100 books, and you'll find it very difficult to show how perspectives change. But in the case of Sikkim, this narrow story tells us how perspectives can be so different. So that is what I realized while working on this book. And then, of course, I mentioned that while a few decades, while individuals live just for a few decades, nations live for much longer, and civilizations live for millennia. You see, civilizations live for millennia because the Indic civilization will transcend. It has transcended so many nation states. I mean, the Indic civilization has transcended so many states. कितने राजा गए, कितनी रानियां गईं, कितने और जाएंगे, कितने प्रधानमंत्री आएंगे, कितने जाएंगे. But the Indic civilization, as a civilization, and ultimately it is the civilizational context in which the nation state is placed. We are so privileged to live in India because we have a civilization, we have a cultural entity, we have a sacred geography, and we also have a nation state. Now the point is that if this nation state had not been vivisected the way it was, now I can agree, that it is not 100% the fault of the British. I mean, Mr. Jinnah was what he was. I mean, the Congress was also desperate for many things. So I mean, all of us, all our. So it's very difficult in hindsight to say this was right or this was wrong. But the fact is that the games were played. I mean and those games many times these games had no basis. For example, the entire great game for which the entire Afghanistan wars took place, but the concept of the empire which the British had was a very different concept, and that you get from Curzon's lecture, the Romance Memorial Lecture, which he talks about frontier, he talks about buffer states, he talks about frontiers, then he talks about boundaries and borders. So, but we are again veering away. I mean, when I talk to you, the good thing is that we talk so many things. The other issue is that we forget what we started talking about.
No worries. In fact, we are going to continue this conversation, but I want to end this episode on the very profound idea that if there is one thing that defies, should I say, the compulsions as well as the imperatives of cartography, it is the civilizational idea because it persists beyond the changing contours of maps. So, on that note, friends, please do join us another time. Like and subscribe to our channel, share the news, as well as let's look forward to welcoming Dr. Chopra another time, and maybe for a Hindi episode with both his books in the Hindi translations. So thank you so much for joining us today. It was a
Thank
pleasure.
you.
Thank you.